From the heart of Mohican country, it's New Hope Live. Today, it's one of your very own, Kendra Dice. Also, with 25 years experience in social work, Melissa Speelman. Plus music from Vince and the Mississippi Mudbugs. And now, ready, Loudonville? Here's Mary Colace. Hello again.
I like hear this song in my sleep now. I love it.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
Awesome.
It's like, I'm like, and now here it is, New Hope Live.
Mary Colace.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, New Hope Live. He's like, and here she is. No, he doesn't do that. He's like, no, more like, where is she? So welcome. Man, this is our last week. Oh, I know. And in a way, I'm kind of like, yay. I have a whole new respect for our team. The people in the booth, the camera, everybody, and Rob. Whew, this is a lot of work, getting ready for a message every week. And I have a whole new respect for those people. So hats off to our team. Yeah. And, you know, it's been an absolute gift for me to be up here and visiting with you. Thank you to all of you who have reached back out to me and with your comments and how God's already starting to work. I have actual volunteers to help with the horse thing grow. That's kind of
awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I think I have a couple new peeps for Ukraine with you, Vince, this year, next year when we go.
That we were committed to.
Yeah. I've recommended them also. That's just so good. Thank you to the Ukraine people who kind of shared their hearts and their minds and their love for that. Hey, I think there's going to be a story in the Loudonville paper about Ukraine, about us going to Ukraine. Sweet. Did you know that, Rob? Isn't that cool? Yeah. Mana, you get her going. Life moves when Mana moves. So yeah, gifts. Aren't they cool? I don't know why I have this because I'm not going to look at it. It's kind of a nervous thing maybe, but you know, back to school. We're getting back to school, Vince, and we've got kids taking gifts to teachers.
Yeah, that's good news for some, bad news for others.
Yeah, yes. It reminds me of the little boy, Jimmy. He just had a big heart for his new teacher. And he asked his mom, he's like, Mom, can I please take her a gift her first day? And she's like, sure. So he is out in the barn that morning wrapping, and he kind of found paper in a box and wrapped it in newspaper, made a card, had it all ready. And his mom was so proud. They live on a farm like us, you know, a little farm, and mow grass. And then they're, you know, he's like, okay, so it comes time to take him to school. And he's got this box about this big, and she's like, oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. And they go to school, and he walks in, and he sneaks in, and he sets it on the chair, the teacher's chair. And there's a couple other gifts already there. And he's like, oh, so he finds out who the other two kids are that have the gifts. And so we have Jimmy, who's in the barn. I got to get my name straight. We have Susie, and we have Billy. And so it's a small town, a lot like Loudonville. So the teacher kind of knows everybody, and she comes in, and you know how you teachers are that are out here. You act surprised, and you're like, oh, my gosh, you got me a gift, a first day of school gift. And so she sits down. She's like, oh, my. And so little Susie's like, oh, please open mine, open mine, open mine. Well, because it's a small town, you can kind of speculate the gift off of the child's last name. So she knows that this particular child's parents own the local jewelry store. Mm-hmm. So she's like, oh, picks up this cute little box. Looks like something from a jewelry store. And so she's like, oh, my. This is so precious, Susie. You know, is it a ball? No, Mrs. Jones, it's not a ball. Is it a kite? No, Mrs. Jones, it's not a kite. She opens it, and she says, it's a necklace. And she's like, oh, it's a beautiful necklace. So along comes little Johnny. Was he the other kid? Johnny comes along, and he picks up his box a little bit bigger. and it's kind of tall, and she's like, oh, it's Billy. Billy.
It's Billy.
Billy, and Billy says, oh, Mrs. Jones, you're going to be so excited with my gift. And so it's like, she's like, oh, is this a ball? No. Oh, is this an airplane? No. And he says, it's flowers. And of course, his parents own the local flower shop. So along comes Jimmy's box. So Jimmy has this big box sitting on the chair, and he... You didn't know either.
Oh, yes, I know.
Oh, guys, I'm losing it. So picks up this big box. Okay, deep breath. And it's like, whoo, a big box. Well, the teacher gets nervous. This is a Christian school, right? Teacher gets nervous because his parents own a winery. And she's like, oh my, is this a case of wine? You know, so he picks it up, sets it on, kind of heavy. And she's like, oh my gosh, Jimmy.
There you
Jimmy. Go. And he's like, oh, Jimmy. He's like, oh, Mrs. Jones, you got to pick this up, you got to open it. And she's like, is this a ball? No. And she's like, she's kind of tapping it and picks it up and sees how heavy it is. And she's like, is this a remote airplane or something? He's like, no, Mrs. Jones, it's not. And so she like tips it up, shakes it, and some liquid runs out of it. And she's like, oh my gosh. Oh, and she's like, is this wine from your dad's farm? And he says, no, it's a puppy.
Now, see, we know that if it would have been Johnny, it would have been worse than the puppy.
That's right.
So I'm starting to think it's something with J, you know, Johnny,
there
Jimmy.
You go, John, Jimmy.
Although we're lucky here we have a Jeremy, you know.
Oh, but well, we have a great show for us. And, okay, I still hear the headphones. There you go. Over these past 2 weeks, we talked in week 1 about how we can fit in. And we explored what life looks like for us and others as we just kind of seek to move in the direction that God might be asking us. We recognize that it does require a lot of simple faith, and that we learned that the hard part's actually believing in it, you know, believing that we can fit in. And we have to ask the question, can I fit in? And, you know, that led us to week 2 of New Hope Live's question of the day, how do you know? And how do we know that the very thing we are sensing is what God may want us to fit in? How do we know? You know, there's challenges that complicate this. There's tension that gets built up. There's, adversaries. There's all sorts of things. And we heard from Pastor Christopher Liberati and Joe Barron about what kind of challenges they've had. And gosh, I just admire Joe's theory and the whole end of it about why not do something. And we realize that it requires discernment, and sometimes it also requires us to have other people help us with that affirmation as well as speak into it. It's an amazing path and journey, and it's kind of like you're packing a backpack of hope, of desire, of vision, and yet there's this sense of need of faith to carry it that just allows us. So this week we're exploring the question, what's your story? What if you're broken? What if you're broken from something that's happened to you? And what about recovery? I am passionate, as well as the team of this church, for us to become that church that helps navigate people to the fullness of who they are in Christ. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that for us to be that church, we have to be willing to say, wow, what's your story? Or even what's my story? Jeremy, you and I were kind of chatting about this and setting up the series, and you really had a passion attached to this because of a movie that you were watching. And it really got us to stop and realize that we are all broken people, which isn't kind of a new statement, but what I think is going to make the difference in who we are at New Hope is that we start to launch into how to help us become the people that we are so we can get to the business that God has for us. Alcohol, drug addiction, traumatic events, these are a few of the issues that can slow us down. They really weigh down our backpacks. It sometimes is too burdensome for us to even carry, and we just start into life survival skills. A side of conversation that you and I had, Jeremy, you was talking about a movie that kind of put this in perspective for you. So in this next segment, we're going to watch a couple movie clips, and we're going to set it up for you right now. So watch this. I love it. Okay. I can't say it quite like Tom, but it's pretty good. But welcome, Pastor Jeremy, to our stage. Thanks for helping with this part, and we're going to take just a second to kind of navigate some loose pieces of this video clip that talks about just really what's behind somebody's story.
Yeah, that first clip really had nothing to do with what we're going to talk about. It just was a funny part of that movie. How many of you have seen at least one of the Men in Black movies? Okay, so most of you kind of know relatively what's going on. The crazy thing is that I watched this particular movie, which was Men in Black 3, last Sunday night, purely by coincidence. I had no idea how well the plot of this movie connected with the theme of today until the very next day, on Monday, when I'm talking to Mary, and she's basically talking to me about what the theme today, and she's saying the plot of this movie without even realizing it. So everything else in this series has been planned out and thought out ahead of time, except this little segment was thrown in this week because it fits so well. So I have to give a warning. Spoiler alert. If you've not seen Men in Black 3 and you want to and you don't want it to be spoiled, you might want to close your ears or excuse yourself before we show the last video because it gives away a big secret. Is that all I wanted to say there?
Yep. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and get into the first clip?
Okay, so what I wanted to do was start by showing you Agent K, which in that clip there was played by a younger guy, Josh Brolin, but mostly through these movies it's played by Tommy Lee Jones, and if you've seen him in any movie, he's almost always the same, just very, this is the way it is. I have no emotion. I'm very happy right now, but you can't tell. And that's how he is in this movie, and so you get used to that. And I wanted to show you some clips to set that up, but I don't need to. We need to save some time. But Agent J is played by Will Smith, and he's constantly writing K about, you know, well, how did you get to be like you? Something must have happened. What happened? And he says, I live such a happy life because I don't ask questions that I don't want to know the answer to. And it's kind of an important moment in the movie because they're planting this seed that something significant happened to K, but he does not want to tell J about it. And so what happens before this next scene we're going to see is Agent J had to go back in time 40 years. That's why K is being played by a different actor, a younger-looking actor. He goes back in time 40 years to try and save the planet. And he and Kay are working together to try and catch this alien. And in the midst of that process, Kay says, we need to take a break and have a piece of pie. Check this out. So I think we let a little bit of the moment get missed first gathering. It was even somebody that didn't even make the connection on what this whole segment was about. Did you see the emotion in Agent J's eyes? And this is harder to grasp if you haven't seen these movies, but when you get used to the way Tommy Lee Jones plays Agent K, and then you see Josh Brolin here, it's a totally different guy. He smiles. He talks about having fun with this other person, playing darts, and Jay is just blown away. He's like, this is a critical moment in the movie where you realize, wow, something happened. Yeah. Something happened to this guy in his past at some point that completely changed him and who he is and his personality. And that's what we were trying to emphasize with that scene there.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we wanted to say to somebody, what happened to you? Or what's your story? Or I remember that being in my life when I was so broken, and there was a picture that I seen me, and I was disgusting. And I remember these people looking at me, they had that look on their face like, what happened to her that she has to act like that? And I remember taking that picture and burning it. And I never wanted to see that look on my face again, or anybody else to ever see that again. And this really portrays that really well. I like that. So go on, set up the next clip for us.
So I just lost my train of thought. Yeah. Again, this next scene, if you don't want it to be spoiled, is the one you don't want to watch or hear. So cover up your ears. But we're about to experience the thing that kind of sets the stage for today's theme, that something traumatic can happen in our lives, and it changes who we are. And so we're going to witness what happens here in this last scene. Let me set it up for you. Right before this scene starts, there's a military officer who has helped Jay and Kay complete their mission. But right at the last second, the officer protects Kay and is killed himself in the process. And Jay is off in the distance and witnesses this happen right before he goes back to present time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the little boy was him, 40 years younger, and the officer was his dad, and he gets to connect the dots to this long-lost traumatic event in his life about what happened to his dad.
Yeah, he grew up not knowing his dad, thinking his dad was a deadbeat because he was never around. And he even jokes earlier in the movie about, yeah, my dad and I used to play this game. We'd play catch. I'd throw the ball, and it would hit the wall because he wasn't there. And Kay says, don't badmouth your dad. But it's not till the end of the movie that we realize why Kay was standing up for Jay's dad. He has carried this secret for 40 years that that his dad was a hero and protected, and he was protecting Jay by not letting him witness his father being dead, but has looked after him himself for 40 years without him knowing it.
Yeah, and harboring that secret has actually injured him to protect the little boy. And isn't that how it is when we harbor secrets? Oh, man, I mean, that's one reason why we're doing this series, is to try to help all of us recognize the need to just open your heart and start afresh, that there is a way that you can move. There is a way that you can move. So awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming and helping with this video clip. And, you know, before we dive into the whole trauma-sensitive piece, I think we need to have Andy out here. So, Andy, it's time for your signs. Today we're talking about the term trauma, and I pulled some definitions from a gentleman, Chaplain Chris Hagee of Intermountain Ministry. And his goal with his ministry is to give education to us folk about who do church, about how we can be a trauma-aware church. And what it says is that trauma is something that occurs in someone's life that is experienced as either being physically or emotionally harmful or threatening to us. It could be tragedy, war, sexual violence, or an adverse child experience, which we'll hear about here in a little bit, also known as ACE. It's from as long as 30, 40, just like Jeremy, like with this guy, it was 40 years later that he carried all this trauma with him and this event with him. You know, trauma leaves us significantly different. There's just a few issues that can affect trauma. It could be, you know, whether we're misunderstood or we're hopeless, it really changes the person that we are. And I wish it was reserved just for the movies, but it's not. It's a real life issue, and it's a real life issue of who we are here at New Hope. And so I brought on experts this time, and I have some amazing women to come help us chat through this. So bring to the stage Kendra Dice and Melissa Speelman. Kendra is giving me like these little glances of look, like, Mary, 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 what did you do?
There's something about Mary, you know? Seriously. When all the other, you know, late night talk show hosts asked me to come on stage, you know, with them, you know, Letterman, and, you know, I always said no, but Mary knew just how to get to me speaking about trauma, which I have a heart for, so. Yeah. Here I am. Here we are. Yeah. We'd feel more comfortable on a couch in our office, but.
Yeah. Well, I just can't thank both of you guys enough. You both have spoken into my life in more ways than one. And I just think that it's a powerful a powerful issue that we need to address to all of us, individually as well as who we are as a church. And I just can't thank you guys. Kendra, we're going to start with you, and we're going to chat just a little bit about who you are, how you got to be who you are, and kind of what you do. So if you want to kind of take
Is that all, Mary?
Bit. Yeah, that's
okay.
Good.
That should be easy. As a lot of you know, I work as a counselor, and I work with all ages, 3 to 103. I work with
They're really a 103-year-old patient.
well, mostly in the 90s is kind of when they stop trying to get in. But yeah, certainly I work with trauma. I've been multiple trainings on how to do traumatic interventions, but also we get all kinds. You know, the worried well, folks struggling with anxiety, depression, family issues, and I can't tell where to.
Yeah, right here's really
nice
good.
And close.
Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah. Okay, so. Yeah, I feel like I went into the field of psychology and social work and counseling looking for something more, looking for something more that healing, eventually Jesus is where I landed on. But yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So you have children and in your practice, and do families come in like, oh my gosh, my kid's been traumatized, or oh my gosh, are they aware of what's happened, or is it kind of an element of surprise, or how does the conversation get started?
I mean, sometimes we'll receive calls that kids have witnessed violence, they've lost a parent, they've been, the victim of bullying. So sometimes there is that awareness, and people will call in requesting therapy for the trauma that's going on. A lot of times, though, no. A lot of times, maybe kids or even adults will have a lot of anxiety, kind of like we have today, right? A lot of fears, maybe feeling numb. Sort of having trouble getting up and facing the day, not sleeping well, just not functioning. And they're not sure why, but they come to us and,
Kinda
seeking
like
help.
The parent or the teacher, why are you acting like this? And we need to get you into some help. Like if there's something they've done to change their behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you and I met this week, we met actually in our barn and hung out with our new friends and the horses. And that was almost a traumatic situation in itself because Jovi had the pitchfork. And for those of you that remember Jovi when she was up here, that's kind of a dangerous situation.
She beatboxes instead of talks. Now she's holding a pitchfork and my child's over there. It's like, ah!
But as we were talking, the more I talked to you, the more I recognize the passion that drives into who you are as a counselor. I didn't mention this earlier, but you're a brand new elder's wife, and I'm just so excited to know that you and Rob are going to be sitting in people's lives as part of our church foundation with this kind of passion and love, because it's definitely a great place and space to be. And can you share a little bit about, you and God kind of had a conversation about this?
Oh boy, have we ever. We've had lots of talks.
If you want to kind of pick up where that kind of went.
Well, when Mary first called me, I was on my lunch break, trying to, leisurely enjoy my lunch, and I panicked, but I just said yes, absolutely yes, and I felt the nudge that I needed to do this, and I don't know. Can I talk about trauma here? Or
Absolutely.
I don't know where you're going.
Absolutely.
I'm not great with scripts. You know, she gave me a script, and I was like, I don't like that, Mary. Why
don't you share about your beads?
Okay, sure. You guys are wondering why I'm holding these. I wanted to explain a little bit about how trauma works in the brain. So this is sort of a neural network in the brain is what it's representing. And this pretty flower bead is the trauma. It could be a singular traumatic event. It could be a series of events, or it could be a difficult circumstance, bullying, a difficult, parent, etc. And what happens is this part here, when it's stored, in that moment, it's stored different than other memories. It's not stored like, I woke up Christmas morning and, oh, look at the presents under the tree. It's not stored quite like that. It's stored in a way where there's adrenaline and there's fear and there's shame. It's so in this bead here represents the emotions and the sensations. It could be the smell of cigarette smoke. It could be the sound of a gunshot. It could be the rapid, pulse and the pounding of our heart in that moment. So it kind of gets locked away. I know she'll speak more on that later about the amygdala and the limbic system, but it gets locked away. So sometimes we're not even conscious of how that's playing out in our lives. So what'll happen is, maybe I come into church today and I smell cigarette smoke, hear a loud sound, a loud gunshot, or, somebody slamming, or I think a pipe was falling earlier, what is that, and it will trigger that trauma. You'll feel what you felt during that event or that series of events or circumstance, but you won't know why. And the brain's always seeking to make sense of things. So it's trying to understand, why am I panicking right now? Well, I'm here talking to Mary. It must be Mary's fault. I'm going to be mad at Mary. Or it must be you, or it must be this church. Boy, I don't like this church anymore. So if we're not careful, we will wrongly attribute those sensations and those emotions. And if we don't deal with this bead, it'll continue to play out in our marriages, in our families, in our church family, work, etc. So I feel like there's a stigma. I feel like mental health has a stigma. I'm sure you're all aware of it. Most of us, if we had a broken arm, a dislocated shoulder, most of us wouldn't hesitate to call a doctor or go to the hospital, seek wellness. The body is always seeking to be well. It wants to be whole, and it tries. And I think so many of us, we're trying. We try hard, but no matter how much you try, if those bones are like this, they're not going to grow together. So we need that intervention to line that up. We need to have that shoulder put back into place. That's what counseling and treatment, the kind of work she does and I do and so many others. There's so many providers in our area that seek to help you with your bead, your flower bead, with that there, so it doesn't continue to play out in your marriage, in your family, in your lives.
And those other beads, you said the other day, it was so cool. You were like, and so what happens when this emotion happens down here, 4 beads down? It lights up the whole strand.
Activates.
So you might have 4 or 5 things that are related, and now it's interconnected in the whole gamut. And that helps explain why, man, you can be shut down in a hurry, and anger can hit, or you're done, or you're a basket, whatever. It's just an incredible
People will say
experience.
you're being dramatic. You're overreacting. If they knew what you went through years ago, or whenever in that traumatic incident, it would make sense.
Or worse yet, you don't even know the event. Just like what we watched in the video clip. You don't know what's causing all this frustration.
And the brain seeks to heal. So this neural network here that, how you're speaking of, how it lights up, it activates the whole network. If you can heal that trauma, it'll go from a 4-lane highway where it's accessed regularly to 2 to 1 to maybe a sidewalk to pretty soon it dies off. And then that trauma isn't part of your day to day. And how free is that? It's so much better than feeling trapped and under the thumb of it. No one wants to feel that. No one.
So the passion is there.
Maybe a little, yeah.
Personal experience?
When she asked me to share this, I was like, okay, step back, Kendra. What's the topic? What if you're broken? And I thought, well, goodness gracious, I felt broken once, and I felt like I really needed to share that along with this, that I'm not just the provider sitting on the actually safe side. When you're sitting on that side, you don't have to be so vulnerable. But when you're in counseling and you're trying to deal with your stuff, it's really hard. And it's good that we can remember that. So I'll step back a little bit. And grew up here in Laudonville, went to Trinity Community Church with my grandma, and I loved going to church, loved being in the Sunday school and in the choir, and tried to be a good kid. I didn't quite get that concept of a personal relationship with Jesus at that point in my life, but I had the sprinkle of a baptism and tried to live my young years through my teen years without lying and stealing and drugs and alcohol and sex and all that. I felt really important to not do those things. And the traumatic incident that I'm sharing today is in high school. I was on a date, and things happened that I blame myself for, but it wasn't my fault. But I felt, I felt like I was ruined. I was broken. It wasn't my choice, and I didn't have a chance to really, I tried to say no in lots of different ways, and it didn't matter what I said. I felt like I didn't have a voice. I felt very helpless and very out of control. And so I spent that evening at Riverside Park in a car, sobbing for hours, feeling like I'm no good. God won't allow me into heaven. And that moment certainly shaped me. That's one of my flower beads, for sure. And it's no question that I was drawn to the field of psychology and to take as many religion courses as I could get my hands on in college without minoring, because then I had to take ones I didn't want to take, And I don't want to be out of control, okay? So you might have noticed that about me, right, dear? My poor husband, God love him. Here I am sobbing in this car thinking how broken I am. And then just a few years ago, I was baptized by Rob, the Pastor Rob, not my husband, with our oldest daughter, in the same place. That's not a coincidence, for sure. It feels
awesome.
Feels pretty cool.
Sharing that kind of vulnerability, and yet it gives us the opportunity to just say, you worked hard, you went, that changed you, and it also changed the trajectory of how you act, your behaviors. I remember you sharing with me in the shape class that you used to hang out in dreads and with some really cool hippie kind of people, and I just couldn't fathom that. I was like, but it's just incredible and amazing how God has interwoven you. And because of that bead now being in the full healing of Jesus, you have the privilege of sitting on the other side of the couch and looking at people and letting God entertain in the midst of your empathy to know exactly what it is that people need. And man, Kendra, that's incredible. That is the power of being used how you were created.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Can I just share briefly, too? This is... and I guess I didn't hold it up long enough last time. I'm kind of new, a noob at this. This is a cross that means a lot to our oldest daughter. And I don't like to think of this anymore. I don't feel like this is representative of how I am now. Maybe from time to time. I think we're never completely done healing. But I like to think of it that it's not just the counseling. And when I say just, it's hard work. Trust me, it's hard. I've had 4 sessions since Mary called me, okay? Just for this. And I'm not kidding. I wish I were. It'd be a lot cooler if I were joking, But truly, this is the neural pathway now,
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Kendra. Wow. Wow. Sometimes in the church, we may feel re-victimized. And that's the one thing that we want to start to try to take captive around here at New Hope. We are starting to see a pattern happen here where if someone comes and they feel hurt or maybe they feel abandoned, they're left to fend to themselves. And we see people kind of starting to, I don't trust you, or I feel shame, or they're kind of walling up in confusion. Maybe they start to develop some avoidance behaviors, and those are all some of the coping skills of trauma. And we really want to talk a lot more about this topic, and we're going to get to it. But right now we have a song that I think brings this to home into its fullness. How you doing that song, Vince, hearing your daughter sing that?
Well, that's pretty awesome. Having 3 daughters that I wasn't familiar with the song until really today. Pretty powerful song, very powerful words, brings a lot to me and a lot to think about. And actually, it makes me think about why God's put the things in my heart about my daughters and why I do some of the things that I do.
Yeah.
Hopefully they understand.
Yeah, it's just an incredible. The thing I like is no matter how poorly we've done, there's always a start over. You just have to believe in the redemption power. And
Yep. Certainly the start overs and the do overs are things we would like to avoid, but they happen in life. So.
Yeah. Wow. Melissa, welcome, Melissa Speelman.
Hello.
So I quote, what does it mean for a ministry to be trauma informed? It says, most ministries seek to comfort those who are in distress, help those less fortunate, and desire to alleviate suffering where they can. But in doing so, perhaps they have not considered those quietly suffering in their churches and their communities due to present difficulties resulting from past traumatic experiences. And we want to continue to kind of, this is like a huge iceberg, and I know we're only getting on the tip of it, you guys, and I thank you once again for that. But Melissa and I had the privilege of sharing life together over this last, well, a lot more years than this last year, but it's another message. But we started to actually attend training sessions that were put out by Star Behavioral. And what Star Behavioral did was they recognized that the veteran suicide rate was kind of starting to tank out to 22 a day. And there are not enough VA facilities and counselors and trained people to kind of help them all navigate it. So Star Behavior started pitching out all this free, incredible, amazing training. Melissa and I got a hold of each other and started talking about it with my desire to get into trauma-sensitive coaching. And we started going to some of these training sessions together, and they're specific for you to understand the military population. And so that you really don't sit down and be stupid when you're talking to somebody. Well, you can still be stupid, I can. But you don't sit down and you don't insult an airman by calling him a soldier or whatever. And you really get to understand the understanding truths of what veteran life was like, and it just was incredible.
And their families.
And their
what
families,
they go through as
yeah.
well.
And so we started partnering. How can we make a difference in our community? And then we got to the point, well, how can we make a difference in the church? And that's kind of what led us to here to where we are. There are 4 points that we are going to be taking captive here in our church in the leadership perspective. And the first one is, I think we have a slide on this that says, realize that there's a trauma problem, basically. We got to realize that the impacts of trauma, and that we have to start to understand that there's a path that can be taken for recovery. We have to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, and I think even more importantly, the staff. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we launch ourselves into situations just because of what's happened to us in the church, and I think we've started doing that. We've started backtracking and saying, okay, who are we as a staff and others in our church? And then we got to do something about policies and procedures and the way that we're going to make awareness in this. And then we have to actually seek, like you talked about, how do we keep from re-traumatizing people? What is it that we need to set up in the systems that we have, in the education and the understanding of who we are? And so, Melissa, if you could just kind of take over here. You've got a few minutes, and I'll shut up, and you can just talk about it away. And
Well, you wanted me to talk about the 4 R's, and those are through SAMHSA. They are in workplaces to help places become trauma-informed, schools, hospitals, churches, and to help people kind of see what they're working with, what to look for, how to help. I think the biggest thing, that was put out is to take the different view of looking at someone who's been through trauma, not look at their actions and behaviors as what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. How can I help? In being able to realize that it's out there, and everybody responds differently. How I react to trauma might be different than how you react. It's based on resiliency too. Our bigger our support system, sometimes the better our resiliency, and we do respond or rebound quicker than others who have less of a support system. So a support system is extremely important. You want to be able to, recognize signs and symptoms, depression, anxiety. The biggest things you see with trauma are, the first one is avoidance, that someone that has been through trauma and is not rebounding, and their brain is not recovering like it typically would.
There's an actual physiological change that happens. Like you were talking about that doesn't go to the right filing cabinet where a normal memory should go. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, with the filing cabinet, it's kind of, if you think about any time you go to a restaurant, you know what to expect. You kind of pull out of your brain, which is your filing cabinet, or organized better than mine, but mine's kind of a mess. But you go to the restaurant, you know what to expect. You're going to go in, you're going to get seated, you're going to place your order, you're going to get your food, and you're going to pay for it. When a trauma has happened and that it's led to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, what happens is this trauma does not fit in the filing cabinet. Your brain, it does not find a place. So it's not like you can file it away and put it away until you need it again like we do with our filing cabinets. It is always there, is affecting everything within your daily life. Every decision you make, every reaction you have. So you might be more hypervigilant to sounds. A veteran might really struggle going to fireworks because of the sounds, or past tall buildings. Or someone that has been raped, it's going to be harder going into places that they aren't familiar with because they don't trust people. And losing that trust for people affects us a lot.
Wow. So as far as creating a venue for us to understand treatment, can you give an example? I had permission to share, my son-in-law came from Texas, got out of the Army, PTSD veteran, and just ran. I did not know this when I started taking these classes. I had no clue. That's just how good God is. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need to get you hooked up. And what do you think? And he's like, yeah. And so he's been doing some trauma-sensitive direction and training called exposure therapy, which is just one of, like Kendra mentioned, there's many different types of therapy. But this is one that the military has been training and coaching us in. Can you explain a little of that?
One of those evidence-based. It's a prolonged exposure therapy. It is really tough therapy for the therapist, but especially for the clients. Probably the tougher therapy I've ever done in my 20-plus years of doing counseling. But it's where multiple traumas. People may be through multiple traumas too. So maybe not just one trauma, but multiple traumas that they're dealing with, and so they avoid life. And their second thing I was going to say real quick too is that not only avoidance is a big thing that happens, but the negative self outlook, but negative self-beliefs of life, and just everything.
I'm not worth, and it's not that they don't go into a sympathy role. They go into my
guilt.
Family's going to be better without me.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I need to just get out of their hair.
Absolutely.
I need to just stop living.
And so with prolonged exposure, you have them identify, and by the third session, you have them identify their biggest trauma, the one that brings them the most distress, the one that is just giving the most flashbacks, nightmares, all that. And so they start in that session and go for up to 45 minutes of telling you details about it. The big thing is that you notice with that, and once they're done, I ask them to start over again, tell them what a great job. And so if it took them 10 minutes, they might have to go through it 4 times, just that one session. But what you see is as they do it, and they practice that daily as well, because we record it and they take that recording home and walk through it, is that you see them start remembering more details. And they stop avoiding it. They stop avoiding it because of the fear of it, and they also stop the negative self-beliefs about it, like it was their fault or they could have done something different. So you see the SUD score, which is their distress level, which goes to 100, slowly decrease as they tell the story each week, because you do that for several weeks, and then you find the hot spots within it as well. And then you do homework with them. They identify distressing situations, and I'm making them go, I sound like a really mean therapist, but I make them go practice that. So if going to the store is a difficult situation for them that gives them like a 70 or 80 distress level, I have them go into the stores for 30 to 40 minutes or until they notice the distress level comes down. And they have to do that 3 or 4 times a week in between sessions.
Now, Tony would say that he must be traumatized because going into a store for him would be... Some men, I think you would say
that's more irritation than high distress, fear, distress level.
Like my heart's racing and my...
I'm going to throw up and I can't do it, panic attack. That's more like, oh, not again.
Yeah. I think the thing that I've noticed in our own household with this is that slowly but surely the memory is losing power.
Absolutely.
And that I just am like, oh my gosh. And now they're ready for traditional talk therapy. It's like, how many times have I told people as a mental health nurse or even a life coach or a disciple maker, whatever you want to call this, I do. I'll say, you know what, you just need to get into counseling. And they just look at me like, uh-huh. And I'm just like, I kind of walk away from people, go, until you want to fix yourself, there's nothing I can do. Well, I pat myself on the back. I did my thing. Now I am like on my face asking forgiveness in the name of Jesus for thinking that, first of all, I know all that, and second of all, that I don't get it. I don't get that talk therapy doesn't work until they're ready to understand how to unpack that trauma.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how many people I've given up on and could have possibly worked on, and all of us. And that's the reason we're doing this, is like, not that you need to be the therapist, but that you need to help
support and guide and be the mentor to help them get to where they can get the tools they need to help heal themselves, to help get back to living their life, because the avoidance keeps people, the brains have not returned because of, trauma affects our brains. It changes our brain. It rewires our brain. And it can be turned back around, but you can't live in the avoidance and the negative self-beliefs, or that's where you'll get stuck.
Yeah. Wow. Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you, you guys. This has been amazing. Oh, my. Wow, Rob. You know, this weekend has just been action-packed here at New Hope. There were about 10 of us. I don't know how many. Was there 10? 12 of us from New Hope that went through a training this weekend from on perspective of wellness. And it was not put together with this, but God is so divine in the way that he intertwines things, that we went through some a prayer journey, basically, on understanding just really what the gospel teaches and what God has to say about who we are in our fullness. And what I came away with was recognizing that we are three parts. We are physical, we are an emotional, and we are a spiritual. And that's something that you have taught us for a long time. How about the physical piece? Does he lead by example? How many pounds have you?
Over 90 now?
Man, I mean.
Did you say physical beast?
Yeah, Jeremy
Physical
actually.
beast?
Huh?
Is that what, did you say physical beast? Wow.
Jeremy actually said this week, he goes, I'm not able to tease you about your size anymore because you've sort of solved that.
Yeah.
He'll find something else.
It's just incredible how you've led by example with that, because that's hard. It's good for us to stand up and say, get healthy, but it's another thing to actually live it out and do it in front of us. You know, the next part is just exactly what we're talking about today, this emotional component of our lives. You know, we can be wrecked. We can have caused it. We could have been victims of it. We could just have been around it. We could have gotten it generationally. There's just so many different ways, but that we have a responsibility. You're never too late. Kendra has 103-year-old clients. Not really, but, you know, I mean, it's like it's never too late for something like that. And then there's the spiritual piece. I really, really seen this weekend in scriptures that there are spirits that attach to us, that keep us stuck, that try to keep us from moving forward, and that cause us to just continue to destroy the concept, the creation, how he put us in the palm of his hand for a purpose. And it's just been an absolute thrill to be part of this series, and I just can't thank you guys enough.
Amen. Amen. So, and you guys kind of just did, but I want to focus it a little bit more. These last few weeks, we're jumping into a brand new series next week called Leadership, about some of the hard things we really do need to shift into and do in order to make a bigger difference with our lives and be the people that God has called us to be. That's going to be a great series. But these last few weeks have really all been the brainchild of Mary. She's done all the hard work, worked with the team to kind of pull this off. Can we say thank you to her one more time? Awesome. Thank you. And most of you don't know this, but really Mary has, like, you've retired a number of times from actually really good paying jobs in order to just be a bigger service to the kingdom, to the church, and do whatever God calls her to do to make a difference in people's lives. And I know, like, we both want to say this. Hey, no matter what way you might feel broken or unhealthy, whether that's in the health area or the emotions area or the spiritual area, as the church, we want to journey alongside people, and we want to help all of us be as healthy as we can so that together we can make the biggest difference for Jesus that we can. That's really what we want to be about as a church. So if you're here and you're like, man, I'm messed up, I'm broken, I'm unhealthy, this is the perfect place for you. Let us know, because we want to journey together. We all want to get healthier.